All right, welcome in here, Steven Strom. A little reaction after the Vikings fall to the Cincinnati Bengals 27-24 in overtime. Obviously, you can follow my podcast on talknorth.com. It comes out on Friday, though, so it's a little bit late as far as reaction goes. We're going to do a preview of the Arizona Cardinals game. We'll get it right around. So I did want to jump on here. Not sure if we're going to keep this a routine, but I wanted to jump on here specifically for week one because this was the most Viking game that you would describe. I mean, that's pretty much, if someone were to ask me, what's it like being a Viking fan? This is what it was in a nutshell. I would probably have told them, come watch this game on repeat. And that's what it's like. It is like when you go down and you think that your team's done, and then somehow you kind of get back into it. And just when you think you're going to win this game, you lose a game. It's the typical reeling in of the Vikings and the typical heartbreak at the end. And that's exactly what happened today. But there was so much that happened in this game. And the one overall, I think everyone can agree on this one thought is that Zac Taylor pretty much kept the Vikings in this game. By going forward on fourth down, you're up 21-7. This offense of Minnesota's had been inept the entire game. And Zac Taylor decides that he is going to go for it, up 21-7. At his own territory. I think it was at his 30-yard line, something along the lines of that. And he decides to go for it. It completely changed the momentum of the game. Vikings get a stop. They go down and score. It's 21-14. Cincinnati ends up coming down, kicking a field goal. Vikings come back down. And I'm sorry, it was actually, yes, they came down, kicked a field goal. Vikings came down. Dalvin Cook ends up making it a 24-21 game. And then the Vikings end up tying it up at the end of the game in regulation. Greg Joseph, who, my God, what a way to step in, 53-yard field goal, puts it up and in. Vikings go to overtime. None of that happens without the help of Zac Taylor. And it's funny because I think there was probably some people watching this first half saying to themselves, wow, like how is Cincinnati this bad? Or why were they this bad last year? Obviously, Burrow went down, but what about the year before that? There's a reason why Zac Taylor's record, and if I'm not mistaken, before this game, it was 6-25. There's a reason why his record was 6-25, and it was that reason right there that you just can't make those decisions. Especially, it's not because Joe Burrow's ACL. It's the way that the Vikings offense had been playing the entire game. It was just a boneheaded move. So without that, really, this game would not have been close. There's no way it would have gotten into overtime. A couple of notes that I have. Just they didn't deserve to win, right? Like obviously, it sucks that the Vikings came down and Dalvin Cook ends up fumbling in probably a play where you thought that he went down. But last time the Vikings had 9+ penalties in the first half was 2005. They ended this game with 12 penalties for 116 yards. Couple of things just really bothered me about this. Not only, I get first game of the year and you're in front of a crowd for the first time in a very long time, but just the fundamentals of football, the leadership. This falls on everyone, right? Especially offensively. This falls on the offensive line. This falls on the coach. This falls on Kirk Cousins. This falls on everyone on that offense, minus Dalvin Cook and probably the wide receivers. And then at halftime, Jen Hale, who was the reporter for this game, she reports that Mike Zimmer told her that he blames many of the first half offensive problems on Kirk Cousins holding onto the ball too long. There's no coach that's saying that about their quarterback. This just shows that there is a toxicity in this locker room that has not been talked about enough. You don't say that. You're not going to see Sean Payton say that about Jameis Winston. You're not going to see, and I'm not going to use the example like Andy Reid to Mahomes because that's just a respect level, but I'm thinking of guys on Kirk Cousins level. You're not going to see Sean McVay do that to Matt Stafford. There is a clear divide between these two guys. And can't you just see Zimmer on the sideline coaching up his defense as Cousins, who doesn't, no one runs into a sack better than Kirk Cousins. Can't you just see it? You see it on the sideline. It's so palpable. So I couldn't stand hearing that at halftime. We can talk about the play in overtime. At that point, I still thought that Zac Taylor was the reason why it got turned over. The offense early on in this first half couldn't move the ball. The penalties, the holds, the illegal formations, it's just sloppy. I mean, it just was sloppy. The Bengals were better than the Vikings in this game. They deserved to win this game. There's no question about it. So that's, the first thing is the Vikings just didn't deserve to win this game. Let's get into a little bit of the positives. And there was some positives. I thought the unsung heroes, if the Vikings were to win this game, was the special teams. Greg Joseph didn't miss an extra point. He comes out there, hits a 53-yard field goal. I thought Barry's punt in overtime gave them a legitimate shot to win that game. He really pinned them into their own, 10-yard line. I thought special teams, the way they covered was really good. So special teams I thought was played really well. Adam Thielen, I can't say enough about him. I think he had 2 touchdowns on 8 or 9 receptions. Dalvin Cook, minus the fumble, I thought he was pretty much the only offense to this team consistently. The thing that bothers me too is like you look at Kirk Cousins. If you don't watch this game, he throws for 350 yards, 2 touchdowns, no interceptions, and you're probably like, oh, Kirk did his thing. You watch this game and you know what Kirk is. You know what he is. He's not going to turn the ball over, but he's not going to take shots down the field. And if that's what the Vikings knew prior to this, they wouldn't pay the guy this much money. I mean, I respect Kirk Cousins' approach if he didn't get paid the amount of money. If this was Teddy Bridgewater and this is what you were going to get from him, well, that's what you get. That's how much you pay for him. That's what you're going to get. But if you're going to pay a guy X amount, he's going to have to eventually go out and win you a game. And this was a perfect time for him. A game where the Vikings did not play well. They had their chance at the end of the game. And listen, he drove them down the field to tie up the game. And ultimately, it was not his fault in overtime because Cook ends up fumbling. But that entire first half, you're just like sitting there and you're like, okay, like 5 negative things can happen to 1 positive. Cousins can get sacked. There can be a hold on the play. There's going to be some sort of a turnover. He's going to run into a sack, or there's going to be some sort of a illegal formation. Those are the things that you're thinking in your head versus him actually getting a completion. So I was on the positives and I'm getting into the negatives of Kirk Cousins. And we'll just do it now. We'll just get it over with. Do I think that Kirk Cousins is the reason why they lost this game? No, I don't think that. I think that if there was a pie chart of reasons why the Vikings lost this game, I think he had a pretty decent chunk of why the Vikings ended up not winning. I thought the defense played pretty well for especially for last year's standards. You saw Pierce get 2 sacks and Hunter. But the leadership is something that we're just never going to see, I don't think. I just don't think we're going to get that command. And it shows with his teammates and coaches. Like even a couple of times, Cousins throws to Jefferson. It's a little bit behind him, and Jefferson kind of puts up his arms, really showing up your quarterback, which you're not really supposed to do. You're supposed to put your head down and get back to the huddle. You just see those guys doing those things to Cousins. You see Mike Zimmer taking those verbal shots. You see Justin Jefferson with the body language. You've seen Adam Thielen on the sideline, yelling and screaming at Cousins. I think there's a respect factor. And if you don't possess that as a quarterback, you're just bound to fail. And by no means am I blaming just him for this loss, but there is this overall, I think, general aura of this team where there's just no belief in number 8. There's just none. There's no, I don't think there's really anyone in that offensive circle that was like, okay, like we're down 3 right now. Kirk has the ball. Like he's going to get us down there. I think everyone's kind of holding their breath and just kind of going through the motions. It's just tough. It's really tough. It's a tough pill to swallow because, a couple of years ago when, I guess not a couple now, 2018, you got to the NFC Championship at 13-3 with Case Keenum. And you went out and you basically said, this guy's the missing piece to your puzzle. And if I would have known that this is how he was going to play, like, I don't think there's any question the Vikings would have never, ever, ever put that money forth for Kirk Cousins. Like you don't pay this guy this much to check it down, right? Like I'm very curious to what his average airtime was per throw, because a lot of them really felt like dump offs to Dalvin Cook, had an occasional maybe 15 to 20 yard dig to Thielen, a couple of play actions, a couple times to Tyler Conklin. But for the most part, like he's not sitting back there and letting it rip. And he's got too many weapons on this team to not feel that way. Another negative is clearly the offensive line. And this was something that was the number one concern going into this year. No Darius Shaw, your first round pick. You just signed Brian O'Neill, but you had a lot of question marks as far as Cleveland, Uda, a lot of different question marks. And those question marks were answered in this game, specifically the first half. I thought they did a decent job in the second half, but this first half ultimately buried the Vikings into a hole. And again, if Zac Taylor doesn't make that decision, this game isn't close. I don't think this game is close. If the Vikings don't figure out this offensive line, it's all predicated. Like the Vikings have 2 really bad combinations going into this year, and they've had it for the last couple. Bad offensive line, immobile quarterback. Those 2 do not go well together. Those 2 do not equal success. And when you have one, you better make sure that the other is solidified. If you have a bad offensive line, you better make sure your quarterback can run a little bit. Kyler Murray last year with a bad offensive line. If you have a really immobile quarterback, you better make sure you protect him in front of you. A la Tampa Bay Buccaneers going out, trading up for Tristan Wirfs 2 seasons ago, or maybe I think it was last season. You need to make sure that one of those two positions are solidified when that's the identity of your team. And the Vikings have not done that. So now looking ahead, and it's one game, I got off the phone with my dad, and you know how this usually works. We're out, Vikings are done, that's the first game, overreaction. You know that they're going to come out next week and play Arizona tough. It wouldn't surprise me if they went out and won this game, and they're probably going to be 7.5-point underdogs. But you look ahead here to this schedule, and it goes as followed. At Arizona, home against Seattle, home against the Browns. Folks, if this goes 0-4, and boy, trust me, with Seattle, the way they look today and the way that Cleveland's looking right now, they go off to 0-4, and they started off 1-5 last year. I don't think Mike Zimmer makes it past the bye week. I don't think he wants to make it past the bye week. I think there's a lot of animosity between Mike Zimmer and the quarterback. So looking ahead here, you lose to Cincy. You go to Arizona next week. You come home to Seattle and Cleveland. I think a lot of Vikings fans were pretty optimistic about 2-2. I think that's a long shot right now, the way you're looking and the way you look today and the way that these three other teams have looked. Arizona went into Tennessee and looked unstoppable. Kyler Murray had 4 or 5 total touchdowns. The Seahawks went into Atlanta and won. You saw what Russell Wilson was able to do. Or was it Atlanta? It wasn't Atlanta. It was Indianapolis. And then Cleveland, who's battling it up with KC right now. A lot of really disappointing outcomes for the Vikings as far as their offensive line went, as far as Cousins went. And then just as far as the result. In overtime, you had a chance. I don't necessarily, and this will end on here, I don't necessarily agree with how these refs had 2 plays here. One of them, the Jefferson touchdown that got called back. I thought that he was in. I don't think that he was down. And they're lucky that Cook was able to go in on a pitch that probably should have been a loss of 2. He ends up getting in, so we don't talk about that. And then the one in overtime, I totally felt like the referees were suckered into calling that. If you have conclusive evidence, you call that. If you don't call that. And I didn't feel like there was conclusive evidence to call that on the field, which then meant when it went to replay, they needed to have conclusive evidence to overturn it. You hear Mike Pereira, you hear Chris Myers, those guys are saying, I think Cook was down. His rear end was down, and then it came out. It doesn't matter because you need to have conclusive evidence that happened. It was tough to see. It was definitely tough to see. So ultimately, that is incredibly frustrating that you played a bad first half. You got some life from the other coach. You weathered the storm. You battled back. You kicked a field goal to go to overtime. You got a stop. You got 2 stops, actually. And then you come down and you're ready to set up for a field goal, and your best player ends up coughing it up. And it looked like he was down, and I guess to the refs, he wasn't. So that's how the Vikings go out. Again, I started at the top of when people ask me what's it like being a Viking fan. This is it. That's why I'm becoming a little bit more number to this, which is cool. I'm not as ticked off. It's week 1. You just get used to it. This is the epitome of being a Viking fan. Going down early, thinking you have no life. Somehow, some way, you finagle your way, being reeled back in. And then once you're reeled back in, invested, oh my God, 1-0, we're going to make it, we're going to win. You get stabbed in the chest. And then you go back down and you're like, yep, that's it. If you had to look up, what is it like being a Viking fan? This is the game.